Hello, and welcome to 2 Minute Talk Tips. I'm Bill Monroe. This week's tip: take more pictures. Images are often better than text on your slides. You can use them to make an analogy, or explain a point, or make a humorous aside, perhaps to set a mood, or at the end of a session to leave a lasting impression. But getting those pictures can be a challenge sometimes. How do you get them? Well, you've got a number of options. You could use generic clip art. Of course, your audience may have already seen that particular clip art before. You could buy them from a stock photo company and make sure then you comply with all of the detailed license terms and make sure you pay for the image. You could just download them from the internet, and while you probably won't get caught, it's probably also still illegal. The best source for images can often be your own photo library. I mean, you already own those pictures, so you don't have to worry about any copyright issues or challenges with that. You don't have to worry about paying for them. Plus, today's smartphones make it easier than ever to capture fantastic photos of other things that you just happen to see around you. The challenge is making sure you have enough, and the best way to grow your photo library is simply to take advantage of that smartphone or other camera and just take more pictures. Don't just try to take pictures for your deck, but instead just try to take pictures of anything that you find beautiful or even just mildly interesting or humorous or unusual. See, the thing is, you may not have a use for that picture today, but you might a year from now, or 3 years from now, or 5 years from now. When you ultimately do use that image in a deck, you'll have a more personal connection to it. Set a goal to actually take 5 pictures a day. They don't all have to be good, but the best way to get better at taking pictures is to simply take more pictures. Stick around, and after the break, I'm going to talk about the hiatus that this podcast has been on over the summer of 2017 and what lessons we can learn from that. Hey folks, thanks for listening. We'll get a couple of quick program notes before we get to the meat of today's podcast. First of all, I appear on this week's episode of Caffeinated Comics, and the episode that launched on August 21st. The weekly podcast from John Clark and Stephen Brown covers all sorts of geeky and nerdy things, especially of interest in the Chicagoland area, but of more general interest as well. John and I talk about my recent health challenges, as well as quickly go off topic into a whole bunch of other things, including, of course, yes, Star Trek. Caffeinated Comics is now part of the Radio Misfits podcast network, so be sure to check that out. Also, for those of you who do visit the 2minutetalktips.com webpage, you'll see a new edition by August 25th, by the end of this week. That new edition will include a page of recommendations of books and tools and resources that are of interest to public speakers, as well as just other things that I happen to find interesting and cool. This is actually a list of my Amazon affiliate links, so if you do choose to purchase anything by first clicking through that page, I will be earning a small commission on that. Anyway, be sure to check that out. So with that in mind, I hope you enjoy this week's episode. So thanks for sticking around these last few months, or welcome if this is your first time listening. I do want to apologize for the unexpected hiatus. I mean, it has been quite the summer vacation. Basically, on June 3rd, I had a stroke, and I immediately put everything in life on hold to focus on my recovery in June and July. Over the next few minutes, I'm going to tell you the story about what happened, and then I'm going to tell you 4 ways that this story can impact public speakers. Here's what happened. On June 3rd at about 7 a.m., I woke up to use the bathroom, like most folks do. And of course, it felt like my left arm was asleep, so I just sort of assumed that I had rolled onto it and slept on it wrong, like most folks do. I figured it would probably come back shortly. It didn't. As I took care of business, I felt that system failure cascade into my left leg, and my leg became even more difficult to control. At that point, it occurred to me that I might be having a stroke, and I am grateful that I had all sorts of generally useless trivia in my head, including the symptoms of a stroke. I managed to limp back to the bedroom, woke up my girlfriend, and asked her if I was making sense so I could figure out if I still had language control. I did, but I could feel the numbness in my face, and my voice was starting to slur. I told her I thought I needed an ambulance, and she realized what was happening immediately, also recognizing the symptoms of a stroke, and called 911. The paramedics came, they did some neuro checks, they unfortunately endorsed our diagnosis, and quickly loaded me into the ambulance for the $900 ride to the local hospital less than 2 miles away. That ride to Swedish Cherry Hill was, I think that was probably still cheaper than some of the Uber surge pricing I've seen. At Swedish Cherry Hill Hospital, they took me straight into CT and then into a private room in the ER. And that was sort of a pleasant little discovery. I didn't know that emergency rooms often had private rooms for patients, so that was certainly more pleasant than I expected. More people came in and did more neuro checks. They gave my heart an ultrasound, and they eventually took me up for an MRI. Now, the MRI is an interesting machine because as it's operating, it sounds like it's just breaking. It clangs and bangs and grinds and makes all sorts of obnoxious noises, which is a lot to focus on and be concerned about when my brain is trying its hardest not to develop claustrophobia, because the last thing I need right now is to add another neuroses to my list. After the MRI, they took me back to my private room in the ER. Unfortunately, because I actually woke up with the stroke in process, my last known good or healthy time was about 6 hours earlier, so there was no medical intervention they could do to address that blood clot. They just sort of monitored me to make sure it didn't happen again. Eventually, they moved me to my first hospital room up on the neuro floor. While the stroke may have technically been over at that point, my brain cells continued to go offline until my condition sort of bottomed out at about 3 p.m. that day. At that point, my face drooped more, my slur increased, and I no longer had any control at all over my left arm or leg. The left side of my face felt like it was just loaded with 5 to 10 years worth of Novocaine. On Tuesday, June 6th, I moved out of the acute neuro floor and up to inpatient rehab to begin stage 2 of my stroke repair process. I spent 3.5 weeks there and finally went home on July 1st. My actual diagnosis was a cardiovascular accident due to thrombosis of the right middle cerebral artery, primarily impacting my basal ganglia. Now, of course, it could have been a lot worse. The basal ganglia is responsible primarily for motor skills. It's actually the part of the brain that Parkinson's generally impacts too. One way to think about what happened is that the Windows drivers for that part of my body were corrupted due to an unexpected power cut. No blood flow due to a clot. The muscles and everything are still there, and they still work according to factory specs. I just can't use those peripherals. Part of the rehab process is basically installing new drivers and teaching my brain how to talk to my limbs again. I'm slowly getting some use back. It's like I found drivers that kind of work, but not really, and can't access all of the hardware functions. Or that I'm still in the process of coding new drivers for my particular brain's operating system. I got lucky, and I say that a lot because I didn't lose any cognitive abilities or sensory abilities. I had minimal issues with eating and drinking at first, but that's resolved itself as more feeling came back into my face. My speech is pretty much intact, so as severe as it was, yes, I was lucky. A stroke is literally, and yes, I mean literally, a potentially life-ending event. If you think you're experiencing the symptoms that I did, or you may be experiencing other stroke symptoms, get help immediately. Don't worry about potentially being wrong or embarrassed. Let the third-party medical professionals make that call. As a stroke happens, systems progressively go offline. So even if it doesn't feel too bad at first, even if it just feels like your arm might be momentarily asleep, if you wait, you may not be able to use a phone. You may not remember the phone number for 911. You may not even remember what a phone is. The hospital recommends a FAST analysis, F-A-S-T. F is for facial droop. And if half of the face droops, that is a bad sign. A is for arms. If the potential victim can't hold both arms out, that's bad. S is for speech. And if the speech is slurred, that is another bad sign when combined with all of these others. T is for time, because time is critical. If this happens, get help immediately. So that's my story. My recovery continues. I'm walking further and faster. My left arm and hand are still pretty much useless, but they are getting stronger every day. So why am I talking about this on a podcast about public speaking? Well, first of all, because I can. It's my party and I can chat if I want to. But really, there are 4 important reasons. First, it's important for speakers to be able to tell personal stories. Second, a process like this can help a person identify short and medium-term priorities. Third, life as a speaker on the road lends itself to a lifestyle that is more susceptible to stroke, and it's important for all of us to understand that. And fourth and finally, thanks to the power of Yet, stroke recovery is all about the core theme of this podcast. Don't get best, get better. So let's talk about personal stories. Including a personal story in your talk helps the audience connect with you and with your message. In sales, we like to say, facts tell, but stories sell. You can have all the technical details and facts that you want, but unless you connect on a personal level, you won't hold your audience's attention. If you don't engage them emotionally, ultimately you won't persuade them. You may as well just pass out a sheet with your bullet points on it and call it a day. We'll talk more about storytelling on a future episode, but for now, I'd like to point out that stories are effective and personal ones are better. As you build your collection of stories, you'll find you can get multiple lessons from each one. Even in just this episode, I'm using one personal story to make 4 different points, and I'm just getting started with it. I fully intend to mine this experience for as many lessons and points and stories and commentary as I possibly can. So let's talk about priorities. From a big picture perspective, nothing makes you reconsider life priorities faster than rolling into the ER from an ambulance. And I'm not talking about smelling the flowers or how no one on the deathbed wishes they spent more time at the office or whatever other pastel-colored background quote you see on Facebook. What I do want to point out is that things go wrong, and when they do, panic is not going to help. Whether it's a medical emergency, a blown projector bulb, or an issue with an audience member, you've got to take a few key steps. And that's, first of all, stop. Second, go ahead and assess your situation. Figure out what things are going on and where things are at right now. Third, reevaluate the priorities that you need to achieve in the next minute, hour, day, week, or month. And fourth, go ahead and reorganize those priorities. In my case, the first priority became to set aside the pride of potentially being wrong and just ask for that ambulance and to ask for the help I needed to potentially save my life. Once the immediate crisis was over, I looked at my medium-term life priorities and made the decision to suspend this podcast until mid-August and to stop looking for additional freelance opportunities or other employment opportunities. Next step was to go ahead and access emergency funds and set up all bills for autopay through the end of September so that I wouldn't have to worry about managing any financial priorities or contingencies while I focused on my recovery. Basically, the normal priorities of life had to take an immediate backseat to one priority and one priority only, and that's recovery. When things go wrong with travel, with a session, with technology, with an audience, or with your health, it becomes just that important to go ahead and stop, assess the situation, and reorganize your priorities. Be willing to walk away from or delay stuff that had been important a moment before. Identify what is now the most important thing and focus on that new priority with all the energy that you can. So now let's talk about life on the road. I have spent my time as a road warrior And I really genuinely enjoy traveling all over this great country of ours and speaking with folks in different communities about different projects and getting out and seeing things that most people will never get to see. And it is a true joy for me. Even despite the hassles that go along with airports and airport hotels and rental cars and all the hassles, I still do enjoy it. Many folks who do a ton of presentations also travel a lot. The choices many of us make on the road do put us at higher risk for a variety of medical conditions, including a potential stroke. Of course, I got lucky with my stroke. I lost only some physical abilities. It does sound weird to say that that was lucky, but again, it didn't impair my verbal or my cognitive skills. And if you make a career as a speaker, protecting those verbal and cognitive skills becomes really important. My stroke did not turn into a career ending injury. But of course, there are challenges on the road. There are a lot of ways that life on the road can increase your risk of stroke. For example, a lot of times sitting on airplanes increases the risk of deep vein thrombosis, or DVT. That's where blood pools in your feet and calves due to lack of movement. And when blood pools, clots can form, and clots lead to stroke. Most in-flight magazines now actually include instructions on how you can avoid deep vein thrombosis. If you flip to the back of the magazine where instead of articles about all sorts of travel destinations, they have all of that random information about the airline itself, such as what aircraft they fly, their route maps, which beverages happen to be on the aircraft, and there's usually an article in there about some exercises you can do with your feet to sort of minimize the risk of DVT. It's good to try and move your feet and legs as much as you can, even when you're stuck sitting in coach, especially for an extended period of time. Another risk for stroke is sleep apnea. This is one of the things that a lot of people who have sleep apnea find out from their bedroom partner, because often it manifests itself as a very uneven, loud, and obnoxious type of snoring. Basically, sleep apnea is while you're sleeping, your airway closes and you stop breathing. In severe cases, people can find that in 8 hours a night, they may stop breathing hundreds of times. And each time that happens, you end up waking up a little bit, even if you don't become fully conscious of it, which is why people with sleep apnea can spend hours sleeping and still wake up and not feel refreshed. That very uneven snoring is a manifestation of it. And of course, sleep apnea can increase the risk of stroke in a number of ways, and everything from the risk of clots itself, the stress in the brain, the high blood pressure it results in. And of course, on the road, sleeping in unfamiliar hotels can make that more likely, as well as travelers who may have already been diagnosed with sleep apnea and have a machine to treat it at home may choose to not bring that CPAP machine or BiPAP machine on the road with them, to simply go ahead and travel a little bit lighter. And of course, not treating it does increase the risk of stroke and other health issues. Third, eating healthful foods on the road can be a challenge, especially when high salt, high cholesterol, and high carb foods are both so wonderfully tasty and so readily available. Eating right is hard, especially when you don't have a kitchen or time available to cook, and you're just tired and you're working, and oh my, those golden arches or that golden bell are just lit up off the side of the freeway, and it just seems like such a great way to get a snack. It's probably not the best thing for overall health. And of course, for those who do try to exercise, working out and sticking to an exercise routine on the road is also difficult. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. Combine that with stress from travel, along with all these other risks, and that can lead to high blood pressure, which puts you at a much higher risk for stroke, heart attack, random significant nosebleeds, and all sorts of other potential health issues. Now, in my case, my blood pressure had been under control for years prior to my stroke, but the long-term damage from a year or more of uncontrolled high blood pressure took its toll on my cardiovascular system and likely led to my stroke. So, on the road, be careful and take the steps you need to help protect your health. Finally, I want to talk about the most important lesson from my recovery. And it happens to be the most important lesson I try to teach with this podcast every week. And that's don't get best, get better. Going through occupational and physical therapy is hard. The therapists try to make your brain do things with your body that your brain has forgotten how to do. I originally learned how to walk when I was a baby, under 12 months old. And now suddenly I need to learn how to walk again in my 40s. Here's how inpatient therapy works. You don't need to walk miles at the start, just a few steps. The next day, you add 2 or 3 more steps. In a week or two, you walk 300 feet with 3 breaks. The next day, maybe you walk 305 feet with 2 breaks. One day, someone helps you put your socks on. The next day, you spend 10 minutes putting on your own socks. The day after that, you might do it in 9 minutes and 45 seconds. People talk about the importance of a positive mental attitude, and that's fine, but it kind of misses the point. I recommend an action-oriented attitude. Work with the therapist to figure out what you need to do in order to get a little better each day, and then do it. The right attitude is not sufficient for recovery, but it is necessary. Without the right attitude, recovery simply won't happen. I found the most powerful word in recovery is yet. I can't use my left hand. Yet. I can't walk miles around my neighborhood. Yet. I can't safely shower without a chair in there. Yet. Yet is about not giving up. It's about acknowledging the reality of today and resolving to make tomorrow better. When it comes to skills you feel you lack to accomplish something you want to accomplish, don't describe them as things you can't do. They are things you can't do yet. And take the steps to get just a little bit better every day. So that's a lot of stuff for coming back from a long hiatus. Here's what I really want you to take away from this episode. First, know the symptoms of stroke and the FAST analysis recommended by the hospital. Second, make sure everyone in your household knows the symptoms and what to do if they observe them. Third, know your numbers, your blood pressure, your blood sugar, your cholesterol. Get them from your doctor, and if you don't have a doctor, go ahead and get one. Fourth, make the lifestyle changes you need in order to reduce your risk for stroke and follow those lifestyle changes as best you can on the road. Fifth, if something does go wrong, be it a stroke, a heart attack, or something else, make the active decision to get better and do the work that it takes to get better. Sixth, when terrible things happen in life, try to find ways that you can extract some positive value from them and figure out what you can get out of those stories and how you can use those lessons elsewhere in your life or even in your future speaking engagements. And finally, no matter what happens, don't get best, get better.